of the brochure literature. So why, I will not repeat. We have heard that enough. How, I think I had my story, I had covered, others had covered other stories. So I will quickly set the stage for a discussion, which would probably be taking your questions and answering them very objective. It's much better that way, I think. With that, I will invite questions from others. I will have just a word of whatever is a round of word that others want to have on this. I will let them have it, and then you can fire your questions.
I'm supposed to speak a little bit about my experience.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Mick. Just to make it easy on everybody, I work as a programmer for a Target Corporation in San Francisco. I like the questions that frame this discussion. When I analyze a problem, I always start with the why, then I go to the what, and then I get to how. And so the why of all of this for me is the reason why I want to do this is so that I can write better software quicker, so to provide more value to my customer. So that's the why, that's the basic why. The what, as a developer, the single biggest enabler is probably the broadly understood full stack ownership. So owning the entire system of the project, and that brings me to the how, which is automation, and that's where DevOps falls in. So DevOps is not a means, an end. Sorry, DevOps is not an end in itself for me. It's a means to an end. That end is automation. That automation which enables me to have full stack ownership of my project, which allows me in turn to write better software quicker, to provide more value, and to enjoy the process much more. So.
Well, the mic worked for Mick. Okay, so my name is Amaresh. I lead the engineering for a bunch of things on Target.com, including checkout and guest order fulfillment. So to me, like Vittal talked about this. So it's less about what, who, where, why of DevOps. It's only a question of when, right? I think you got to catch up to it sooner or later, and that's what it is about. The second thing that I would say is, eventually, as Mick pointed out, the means, it's the pipeline through which you can cleanly and neatly and quickly push functionality, any functionality it is that you want to push into production, right? I think that's really the key. So, sometimes as we establish new teams in Target, my advice to them, my direction to them is, hey, get your pipeline first, get your pipeline sorted out first. Functionality can come second, because once you have your pipeline, you can throw anything through it and it will flow, right? The second thing I think is, again, DevOps sometimes gets mixed up as an organizational change. I mean, moving boxes here and there. But really, Prakash pointed this out earlier today pretty well. It really goes back to a momentum. It's a cultural momentum, more than it being, organizational changes in terms of, hey, do dev teams and ops teams, do they sit together, or what happens to the reporting structures and whatever not. So those would be my 3 takeaways, I think, to start with, right?
Thanks. I'm Raj. I'm representing Huawei. I'm head of technology cooperation and knowledge management. I will give a different perspective of it. Of course, now it's not the time to think who require it. It's time to say who should think that they require it. There are certain segments still they are not thinking that they require it, the benefit out of it. Few areas is on the open source community. So this is the one area which definitely need to adapt to the principles and the practices of the DevOps. We have been, working with couple of, open source community, Huawei especially from the cloud computing perspective. So we are also involving the open source community to adapt to this DevOps in principle. And second is, from the DevOps when you say the B2C, it's quite, we can explore more. You have your own complete control of your operations. You have your complete control of your, infrastructure. Well, it's good. However, when we look from the B2B perspective, where, carrier network, or from the enterprise perspective, so where you have a very limited or little, kind of control over the operational aspects, infrastructure aspects, or the managed services aspect, there how do we really look into the DevOps? When we talk about enterprise, it's not just the B2C, it should be the B2B, and the internal towards the B2B, those areas still, is immature in our opinion, in whatever we have seen there. And third aspect, I would say, now it's all software defined everything. When you say the SDN, as SDS, all those aspects, things are clubbing up. The Huawei is also looking for how do we package and club this SDE, software defined everything, which is primarily on SDS and SDN into this DevOps kind of scope. So beyond the IT, we are also looking the DevOps as a business model. We are looking DevOps as a successful model which can be extended to the CT aspect of it, not just looking into the IT aspect. So that is the third area which I feel is a one. And the last one I would just say, I know I'm taking more time. The fourth aspect is from the business analytics perspective, not analyst, analytics perspective. Definitely DevOps is now, as I mentioned, is posed as a business model where I could generate revenues. I can use this as a one of the revenue streams in the system integration or managed services. So this is one area which we are also looking for. How do we use DevOps as a business model for the operators to generate the revenues or establish the revenue streams? So these are the four areas which still, not much looked into, in my opinion, and definitely industry is looking for that. Thank you.
Yeah, now to set the ball rolling, I would, if we don't opine and invite debate and difference, there is nothing going to be active. So both in principle and for the namesake of it, I'm going to differ from this person and I'm going to say this point and want some people to either challenge it or add to it. When we are talking here for DevOps, most of the time we are talking it in principle on the engineering approach of it, on the automations of it, of course the tools around it. We are not talking about the business that it would generate. Then what happens is that we get an entire mare coming up, a truckload of confused services, companies which has no discipline at all coming in, and then telling that this is also another business stream for me. There has been mobility, there has been cyber, there has been security, now there is DevOps. If you do that, I think in principle, the DevOps is not one of your offering lines. It is not. DevOps is something with which you power your entire organization for making your existing offering lines based on technology or based on domain. You make sure that it is effective. If you are wanting to offer a DevOps offering, it can only be a consulting thing. Other than that, there is no business that you can attach with DevOps. But even then, I will reserve my personal sarcasm on somebody offering a DevOps consulting thing as to what it is. It's an engineering practice. It's something that people have had the pain in their hands on, how they are disconnected from the ops team or from the dev team or the business community team, have figured out in responding back to this industry with this approach. They had been trying all along for the last 10 years. Agile was extremely good, but the reason why it didn't have this momentum is because some technologies were missing at those days, and that is mainly the entire infrastructure world that has gone into a business model called off-consumption model, that's cloud. And then there is this multi-tenancy, and then there are bazaar automation provisioning tools and all that sophistication with continuous integration and automation. So with that, DevOps picked up on the shoulders of the giant that is Agile. So it is purely an engineering principle. And here I would like to throw the second polarization and leave it to him. The second polarization I would say is that The culture when we are talking about is not the HR issues that we are facing in the organization. That something has to be dealt with HR issues as well. Exactly. The culture we are talking is an engineering culture of competency, willingness to learn, grow, adapt, go beyond your walls of saying there is no taboo in the IT now. There is no, IT is another word. I would rather prefer software engineering. There is no taboo in the ops world of provisioning and infrastructure. Infrastructure is very close to you as a developer or a tester, and so vice versa. So the culture we are talking is our knowledge boundaries extending beyond the walls of me being defined as a dev or me being stigmatized as a tester and going and embracing the other guy and vice versa. So that's the cultural change in the DevOps world that I see and I envision as something very relevant. While there are a lot of execs talk on the culture, quite misunderstood by them, rightly so, because they lack the engineering perspective. And they have all the time been talking about culture as a HR practice that they have to do. That's not what we are talking. With that said, with that sharp opinion, I would leave it to.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you talked about agile, because that, especially in context of agile consulting and agile this, and people going to Scrum Master training and being professional Scrum Masters and whatever. As an engineer, it's very frustrating to me on some level to see the Agile Manifesto, which is, I don't know, it's like 10 sentences. You go to the agilemanifesto.org, and it's very, very easy in its essence. It's talk to each other, analyze the problem, understand what you're doing, and iterate, right? Like that's pretty much it. And yeah, DevOps is very much a technical embodiment of those principles. So seeing all this sort of corporate nonsense grown around it is hard. But I also have there's a flip side to it, right? So I couple of years ago I got into yoga. And so I spent a lot of time paying people money to teach me how to breathe or how to lay down and relax, right? So some things which should be instinctive to me weren't. And so I can understand how there may be a need for it. And that's, I guess, all I have to say about that.
So, firstly, the one thing that I would agree with you is about, I can't come to terms with how DevOps can suddenly become a revenue stream. You can't have consultants coming and saying, hey, we will run DevOps for you. I can't see how I'm going to buy that service, firstly. But that said, I do think culturally when we, you said rightfully so, it's not an HR thing, right? And yet, when you think about what really DevOps comes down to, it's making sure that your basic software code, your test scripts, your test data, and your code for infrastructure, all of them traverse the journey, right, the life cycle from requirements right up to production. How you set this pipeline up, I think there are, to your point, there are innumerable tools, automation paradigms, whatever, that you can use to get it out there. But the cultural aspect, I think that is probably where sometimes, actually in Target, we've benefited from getting some external folks in, but not to come in and say, hey, this is how you do it and walk out, but really for them to sit along with our engineers, pair them up and say, hey, this is how things are done. This is how, you can do it. But then also realizing that in the real world, when you have got 600, 700 engineers working on a real-time application that's working, correct? Then saying, hey, how can you actually change things? How can you change your wheels when the bus is moving, right? So to bring that perspective in and to guide us through that, that's when you need another truck where you can actually park the bus on. It's still moving. Change the wheels, get off the truck, and you're still moving, right? So that's where I think we can do with that help, right?
Okay. Now I don't know what I should say. Anyway, We, as I mentioned, the DevOps as an engineering perspective, definitely we have similar way what we are saying. When I mentioned it's a business stream, it is not that DevOps as a consultant, leveraging the concept of DevOps in terms of collaboration. One example I'll tell you, the feature, what are the various features customers are mostly using? What are the various features customer is less using? What are the experience about it? Having, of course, there are certain tools which are available which can help us to monitor how is the behavior pattern or usage behavior pattern of the customer. Using that as one of the measure, using that one of the mean, and generating, okay, these are the probable, kind of requirements, or these are the probable kind of features customers may be interesting or customers not interested in. How do we look into that holistic, the landscape of the features that we are offering to the customer. So I want to just recorrect myself. We are not saying we are going to offer DevOps as a consultant. Definitely Huawei is not involved in that as kind of aspect. Leveraging the DevOps principle on the collaboration between the so-called, when I say development, it's not engineering, the whole part of, the engineering aspects itself, business analyst aspect, as well as operation aspect, all three put together, how they can understand and identify the customer's behavior and generate the requirements. This is one particular perspective of it. So I just want to correct in that way.
Sure, welcome. This has fed a lot of points of discussion. I would say that in the industry, the DevOps marks the adulthood of software engineering. We had the juvenile phases. We had the phases where industry was defining itself with a lack of lot of tools and